Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of the Valley View. And I'm joined this week by Councilman Tom Andersen of Ward 2.
Thanks.
And there's a few different subjects, and one of them is the streetlight fee. And I think some people might not be aware of it and where the money was coming from before and what their proposal is.
Well, and the streetlight fee has been enacted, and it's starting July 1. So
today.
Yes, that is today. I didn't know if you're supposed to say what day it was.
Well, it is today, but it's going to be aired later.
It'll be sometime later. Yeah. So here's the situation. Some background on it, and then background historically, and then kind of what has happened politically in the process. Before the various ballot measures that reduced the amount of property tax in the state of Oregon that can be assessed, and without saying that's good or that's bad, but
that was the situation.
Here's the result. Mm-hmm. Before those ballot measures, the city of Salem, 87 or 88% of the entire general fund budget came from property taxes. And with the passage of those, which I don't know, were 95, maybe even earlier, they were
at least 20 years ago.
Yeah. What has happened is now 57% of the general fund budget comes from property taxes. So
that's a big reduction.
Yes, it is.
And
I think that's like 31%.
And it makes it much tougher to balance the budget.
Does it?
You have to make cuts on things.
Because that 51 or 57% does not even cover police and fire, two of the basic public safety things that a city is charged with doing. So there has been, the size of city government has shrunk. Again, it's up to somebody else to say is that a good or bad thing. But so the city staff is really, they're stretched to the, not to the breaking point, but they're stretched thin. The analogy I say often is the staff and the services we can provide have already been cut to the bone. And to take the next step, you're going to have to start sucking out the marrow. You do that, the organism dies.
Yes.
And this again was one of the things that I talked about in my campaign. We need a realistic look at the city expenditures. And I was convinced before, and I'm even more convinced now, having been a counselor for all of 6 months, but having also went to the council meetings for at least 6 months before that. I'm convinced the staff is doing a terrific job with the resources they have. So that's the expenditures. The other half is the revenue. And at some point, with the population increases, cost of everything goes up, we have all sorts of city infrastructure that is past its useful life.
We also have some earthquake safety issues.
All sorts of things are going to happen. We're going to have to find some new sources of income. And, one of these is a streetlight fee. And that would go toward, it's dedicated toward maintaining the lights we have, toward changing out the lights, that is moving from I think I'm going to say incandescent. The standard lights that we all grew up with, to LED lights, to fluorescent lights, to other lights that are less. They last longer,
and they're more energy efficient.
Yeah, they consume less electricity. They're more energy efficient. That's an important thing, because you will see as the years go, those savings will increase, and so one of the ways to do it is to have a streetlight maintenance fee, and the end result of the fee will be to release funds from the general fund that were being used for these expenditures. And in reality, they were being used to replace incandescent lights with incandescent lights because they're cheaper.
Right.
And you want to keep the cost down, but it will be used, that money that was spent, and under the current ordinance as passed, it'll be about $1.4 million a year. Those funds can be used for street repairs, for fixing your potholes, the kind of day-to-day maintenance that has been very hard for this city or any city to do with the property tax limitations. So it'll benefit in two ways. One, it's going to save us money in the long run on the existing lights, and then any lights that would be replaced or added would be the more energy efficient ones. And it's going to free up money to do the repairs and maintenance that is needed. And that's the same thing as any homeowner does. You can put off your maintenance, and that's for the city. We can put off our maintenance.
But sooner or later, you're going to pay a price.
That's right. You're going to hit the brick wall. You're going to go over the cliff. Whatever analogy you want to use, it's going to happen.
The streets become undrivable.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Or on bike rideable.
Yes.
Now, so I supported that in theory. It's a good idea. I had some disagreements with the rate structure, and here's how the process is. The rates will be added on to your water and sewer bills, because that's just an easier way to collect, because we're already collecting water and sewer bills.
You don't have to start a new process.
That's exactly
for doing
right.
it.
That's exactly right. And the way the ordinance was written was that each single family home will pay $2.80 a month, or $33.60 a year, some amount like that. So, less than a cup of coffee a month to pay into the streetlight maintenance fund. And there are 39,000 single-family units in the city of Salem.
Okay.
So multiply 39 by $2.80. That's a big number.
Yes.
And then there are other units, and the units we're talking about are units that have the stormwater drainage. That's how you count a unit, and each individual family single-family home has it. But something like an apartment complex might only have one stormwater drain. So instead of charging individuals apartments in a multi-unit apartment, there's one charge for the whole unit.
But no matter how many units there are?
There is the gradiated, and this was my first problem with the statute. The way it was written and the way it was passed was that if you own up to a fourplex, either a fourplex or a sixplex, I think it was a fourplex, you pay the same as a single family. And the reasoning behind that, I think, is a lot of duplexes and fourplexes are owner occupied. So
they own one of the units.
Yeah, they live in one of the units and they rent out the other unit. And so it seemed like a little bit of a burden to do that on that small of a unit. But if you own an apartment building up to 25 units, in effect, if you own a 25-unit apartment building, you would be paying, instead of $2.80 a month, it was like 41 cents a month per individual unit. Now, those individual units, most of them probably have people who use the public streets just as much and maybe more than the individual homeowners do. Then it gradiated upwards. So if you were the owner of an apartment building that had 100 or more units, you'd be paying something like 9 or 10 cents. I may be a little bit wrong on those figures, but it was something like that. So I didn't necessarily think that was fair and equitable to the single-family homeowners. Now, I didn't see any reasonable way. Well, let me get to that in a minute. Then, if you owned a commercial or an industrial site, you would be paying $13.50 a month.
No matter how big it was.
That's exactly right. So, Walmart would pay $13.50 while you would pay $2.80. And when one looks at that, a lot more cars are going to Walmart or to Costco or someplace else than are going to your house.
Or some small business.
Yes. And small businesses would still be paying, they'd be paying $13.50, the same as Walmart was paying, and commercial would also pay $13.50. So I looked at that and said, that doesn't quite seem fair. And I'll get back to the single family. There was really no way that the single family units could be reduced to any substantial amount because there's 39,000 of them and there's only 3,000+ of every other unit. That is of the multi-unit dwellings, of the commercial, and of the industrial places.
Right.
So, you could reduce the amount, but if you reduce the amount by a lot, it would only make, say, instead of $280, you'd be paying $250 a month. So it doesn't really affect the people at the bottom because there's 39,000 of them.
Right.
But it would make a difference at the other units if you increased them. So at the city council, I proposed at the meeting when we were voting on this and moving on it, I proposed a different fee schedule. And the fee schedule I proposed would have doubled the amounts that the industrial and the commercial units are paying, from $13.50 to $27 a month. It would have gradiated a little bit steeper the multiple units, and I can't tell you exactly what it was. It never got anywhere close to $2.80 per unit. I want to say it maybe doubled the price per unit. So the bigger units were maybe paying twice as much as they would have, or maybe up to 3 times, but something more. And what that actually did, Ken, was to come up with about another when you add those all together, the increases, it came up with about another $400,000 in revenue generator from that, which I viewed as an equitable way to do this. You cannot lower the single family dwellings because it won't really affect anybody,
right,
whether it's 30 cents a month or 20 cents a month. But you can increase, to be more fair, the larger units. Now, another thing about this is, let's take your standard strip mall. Maybe there's 4 small businesses.
Right.
So one could say, gee, there's 4 businesses there. These small businesses that are just barely making it, instead of $13.50, they'd have to pay $27. But that's, for the most part, not true, because a shopping center that size is only going to have 1 stormwater drainage. So it's going to be 27 split among 4 businesses as opposed to $13.50 split among. Now, the other thing I looked at on this is, it was kind of very interesting, because one of the things that was PowerPoint presentation was given us was like, a nightlight, a bird's eye view of the city. And there are a whole lot of areas that are pretty dark at night, and those are mostly residential streets. So in fact, the vast majority of the streetlights aren't on the residential streets where the single family people live. They're on the arterials, they're on the collectors, they're on the parkways, they're on the bigger streets. You look at any pattern of any city, Mission Boulevard is well lit. The Parkway is well lit. Commercial North and South is lit. Market Street is lit. Lancaster is lit. Marine Drive is lit. Edgewater is lit. And all of those places they're lit, I guess, is that the past tense? They are lighted for people to get to them. So that's another reason.
Traffic.
That's exactly right. So that's another reason why I thought, well, maybe the commercial and the industrial people should pay a little more,
right,
because the lights are actually there to help people get to their establishments. And so that's what I proposed. Mm-hmm. And I got no support on the council. The vote, I made an amendment saying, let's substitute my schedule for the rate schedule for the proposed rate schedule, and that was voted down 8-1.
But it would have brought in more money?
Well, I thank you for reminding me that. Yes, it would have, and it also, that money, my proposal was, we get this extra $400,000, we could use that to partially to use it for the more street maintenance, but also we could use it to provide more lights in various areas of the city that don't have lights.
That could use it, maybe.
Exactly right. So that didn't get voted, didn't pass at all. And then when the actual measure was passed, I explained that I'm for it in theory. I think it's a great idea, but I didn't think it was fair and equitable, so I voted against it. And I will say that when we came up, you vote one time on the first reading, and then you have the second reading. There's all sorts of sort of arcane legislative processes that have to be passed. And I voted against it on the final reading, again saying, I'm for it in theory. I think it's a good idea. We need the revenue, but I'm against the rate structure because I don't think it's fair and equitable. Another counselor, in fact, did say, I'm voting for it, but I'm a little reluctant because I don't think it's fair and equitable. And he asked that that it be reviewed and revisited at some point in the future, and I'm sure it will. And I think all counselors want to review it and see how it's going. And typically in that, it would be 6 months or maybe even out to a year. And I think the council is very conscientious in doing that sort of thing, to look at, to give it a time to move through the system and then to reevaluate and reassess.
See what the impact was.
That's exactly right.
And well, see, I guess that I'm looking at it too, that in a city where you've had a restricted budget, to come up with an extra $400,000 a year. I mean, it's not a huge amount,
No.
For the city budget.
No.
But it is going to help.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the kind of thing that you need to be looking at. And I mean, those that are benefiting from the street lights should be paying more.
I agree. Well, and
because otherwise, if I had a small business and I'm paying the same as Walmart or somebody else, some big establishment, I would be kind of annoyed.
Well, that's the point that I made. We've got a political process for a reason, and I think it was voted down, and that's the way the council works, and that's the way it should work. And I'm not expecting that all my proposals are going to win, but I am.
But at least you started to change somebody's mind.
That's exactly right. We started the conversation, and I think that we will revisit it and we will look at it. Another example I can give of that same kind of process, and this is not what we're going to talk about today, but I look at the same thing at the downtown parking ordinance. We've gone back and forth, back and forth. And so the last time we moved to the 3-hour limit, the council as a group said, we're not going to touch this for a year. We're going to let it work its way out and see what happens. Because we were going, we were getting whiplash back and forth from unlimited free parking to, 4 hours to unlimited free to what are we going to do? And so in order to see that if the current stage where we are on the parking, in order to see that it works or doesn't work, you need a long longitudinal period of time to discuss it. So that's another example that the council will come back and revisit things in various times.
What this reminds me of is when I was in college, I had a psychology professor say in class that it takes 5 years for someone to change their mind. And see, like, once you get the conversation started, people will start to see the benefit, maybe. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to do this. You want to not just go along to get along, but to try to make the point.
Tangentially, Ken, that's exactly what I'm trying to do on the council, is to start the discussion. And there's another psychological, sociological phenomena is that when you start that conversation, when an idea is accepted by 20% of the population, then at some point in the future it's going to become a reality. And an example we can use in the national scene is same-gender marriage.
Which we've seen a huge change in
over the years. And it just happened like that. Once we got a kind of a critical mass of the 20%, it doesn't roll out in an arithmetical nice line like this. Once you get to a certain point, it just pops right up. And that's exactly what happened in both the governmental and in the judicial timeframes. I mean, we just know what happened. Since we know this is July 1, we know what happened last week.
That is, yes. But I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think that is the point, is that you reach a critical mass.
Yeah.
And see, this is part of the conversation I think needs to happen. You're bringing out that this property tax restriction has limited us.
Yeah.
So we need to think about not just cutting back, because we've done that.
Yeah, we've done the cutback.
Now we need to think about what's reasonable to bring in some more revenue to,
Yeah.
or do we need to say that we will only do this?
Yeah. And, you know, in some ways, that's where we're approaching without doing something else. And that, you know, looking at it, I suppose, from the individual's perspective, well, that's going to be more money, I can't afford it, I can't do this and that. That is certainly is one way to look at it, but that's not the way that I have to look at it from the city councilor's point of view. Yes, I have to take that into account, I have to think about that, but I and the other councilors were responsible for maintaining a healthy, viable, vital city. So, you know, we've got the whole broader public interest to look at, and that's, you know, you have to weigh and balance things, but that's really what you need to look at as a counselor.
You know, one of the things that you were talking about a little bit earlier was about biking. And there's a whole movement now about bike boulevards. So I was wondering if maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about those?
I certainly would.
And you like to bike, so
well,
I thought that
you're looking at a guy who rode his bike down to the studio today. And I try to ride my bike every place. And there have been some good citizen activists, I forget their name, but they have been coming to city council and they have been pushing this for bike boulevards for really what's called family-friendly bike areas. And they showed us a survey that said, you know, a national survey, not a Salem survey, that said of all the population of people who could be riding bikes, there are 1% who are fearless, confident, aggressive riders. There are 7% who are confident but still a little concerned. And then there are something like 60-some% of people who would like to bike but don't because they're concerned about safety. And I said at the council meeting when that was described to us by somebody, I said, for the only time in my life, I'm in the 1% because that's where I am, but not everybody is. And it really is not necessarily helpful to have a stripe lane, a bike lane on Commercial or on the Parkway or on Mission because
I'm not that brave.
That's exactly right. And I ride on those streets, but most people don't, with good reason. So what we need is bike boulevards, which provide the same thing, but they're a street over. So they might be on High Street, they might be on Church Street. They'll
might get you there.
That's exactly right. And so the city has been very interested in that. There's really a lot of interest in the core city groups, which would be right now Wards 1 and Ward 2. And, but everybody else is interested in it. And the city staff and some city councilors actually went up to tour bike boulevards in Portland. And we've got funds right now to work on the intersection at Union and Commercial. Union Street is the Union Street Bridge. So we've got that lovely bike bridge. But you come across from West Salem or you're trying to get to West Salem and you run into the Commercial Liberty couplet and you run into Front Street going to the Parkway. It's a very, very dangerous spot for bikes and so and pedestrians.
Oh yes, and because people get focused on the traffic and they don't see the pedestrians starting to come out.
Right, and you know, they want to hit the next light and it's that Commercial and Union and I don't know if it's Front Street at the start of the Parkway there and Union, they're very auto-centric. And so as part of this program, we've got the money already to, in the next, whatever the cycles are, we'll be putting in signals, we'll be making that intersection much friendlier for bikes and pedestrian. And the plan is to continue Union Street all the way out, say, to the Capitol Mall or someplace that far. And then we also are applying for, and I can't remember, I believe we have received a grant, the Public Works Department have. They've been very proactive in working through these things, which takes, we can't just snap our fingers or wave the magic wand. It takes a long time to move these things through. They're looking at, the proposal would be to do a study and planning for a north-south bicycle pedestrian friendly boulevard, which would be Winter Street, which would go at least from the Capitol Mall all the way out into North Salem. So these are very good programs, and they started because of citizen involvement. I mean, we had some great testimony from people of all ages, including just a real sweet little kid in middle school who said, I go to this middle school, and to get there, I want to ride my bike, but to get there I have to cross the parkway, or I have to cross some other busy street, and it takes forever, and I'm afraid, and my parents are afraid, and if we would, I'd love to be able to do that. And so I think we're moving toward the reality of making Salem a more bike-friendly city. And I want to emphasize, Ken, that this is not just take your family out for a Sunday ride. This is ride your bike to work from North Salem, you work on the Capitol Mall, down to the Capitol Mall. It's ride your bike to work if you live in West Salem, and you've got a bridge there that is at grade, because railroad bridges are, that's the best grade you're ever going to find, is a railroad bridge and a railroad tracks, even going over the mountains, because they got to be at the easiest grade possible for the trains to pull it up. Yeah. So to my way of thinking, the goal is to get those 60%, or a lot of those 60%, out using their bikes every day. Using their bikes instead of, if you've got, my personal range is 5 miles, but I understand that that's probably pretty big for everybody else. But if you've got a mile to go or 2 miles to go, that's nothing.
Right.
And you got to go down and get a gallon of milk. You can do that. And
sometimes it's faster than going in a car.
Of course it is. I think of that all the time as bikes or cars are lined up at a light, and I'm riding down there and I get to the front.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed, because I used to bike a lot, was that and we talked about this as far as street lights, is that where I worked, it was very dark to get to there. Yeah. And I did not like biking when I can't see what is in my way, possibly. Yeah. And that's kind of an issue as far as safety is concerned.
Well, it certainly is. And as an example, when I ride home from city council meetings late at night, when I go to council meetings, I don't need a light, but I'm coming home, I do.
Right.
And I ride home a different way, Ken, because that particular street that I come to the council on is not well lit.
Right.
So I think we ought to do everything we can as a city to encourage the use of bikes as a different way to get from one place to the other.
And it's less expensive, and we don't have a fully functional bus service as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so that's a topic for another day.
That is, but I mean, it does make an option for people that they can use.
It's helpful every single way you want to look at it, financially, environmentally, and personal fitness.
And it takes more cars off the street.
And
so the people that do have to drive have a little bit easier drive.
No, I agree with everything.
And well, I want to thank you, Tom, for coming on.
I'm glad to be here, Ken.
And this has been The Valley View with Ken Adams and Tom Andersen. Thank you for watching.
Bye.